Welcome to Faith Fondue, a new podcast featuring me, author and speaker Haley DeMaria, and teacher and blogger Ann Strickers. Faith Fondue will feature a melting pot of topics ignited by a flame, our faith, and guided by the Holy Spirit. Each week we will feature a theme, and the theme for this week's episode is justice. Ann, happy Martin Luther King weekend. Happy Inauguration Week. We are in the second week of ordinary time, but there is certainly nothing ordinary about this week. Anne, how was your first week back at school?
Hi, Haley. Yes, it's the week of January 17, and we did return, albeit virtually, to school last week. And one phrase that my former principal used to always say when the beginning of the school year. So in August, he would always say, Happy New Year. So whenever I hear Happy New Year in the school time, I think back to then, which I thought was such a clever, greeting. But it is a new year, 2021. And I also think back to a tradition that we had, and I'm curious if listeners do this. We had at St. Ignatius College Prep, a faculty retreat. So literally the new year, not the new school year, would begin with a 2-day retreat. It was an overnight retreat. And I think of what an incredible investment of time and resources that was by our school community. There was probably 150 faculty members. I mean, everybody who was on staff at St. Ignatius went on this retreat. And it was at El Retiro, which is the Jesuit Retreat Center in Los Altos. And honestly, Haley, I still can think back to the way I was formed and informed on those retreats. Some of the speakers, some of the small group sharing, just to have that time with my colleagues was remarkable. And, we made time for prayer, which was quite significant. For example, on one of the night we would do a reconciliation service. And it was so humbling to see my colleagues go up to either a priest, or it could be a lay person where they just wanted to kind of just share something like a burden, and to watch and see each other. And we would be in the chapel for this was really a beautiful symbol. Again, that notion of reconciliation, which has probably been one of our themes, if not will be in the future. But also we took a lot of time for play. We had, pub trivia, we would have karaoke, get a bunch of teachers together away from their families. It was, we had a lot of fun. So I just think making time for an annual retreat, whenever that is, can be such a gift. And I don't know if that's something that you do or that's part of your life, but I'm so grateful that we had that tradition.
Yeah, I bet. I mean, what a wonderful way for your school leadership and your school community to honor your teachers and staff. I mean, that you're right. It is an investment, of time and resources, I would imagine as well. But, to come back out of off the holidays and where everybody's probably just been stressed and maybe not as healthy as they had been, and, to really ground yourselves and, allow for that community to launch into, not the new academic year, but the new year. And, as educators, we know that this time between now and spring break can get really long and really dark, and you kind of plow through coming back and trying to wrangle the kids. So I love that your school does that. I think most schools do, the 1-day teacher professional development day where the teachers can just sort of catch up. But that's the teachers getting ready for the students, not necessarily the teachers taking care of themselves. So I don't make an annual retreat. It's not something that I have done regularly. It is one of the things that I had been seeking, and still am seeking. A few years ago, I walked the Notre Dame Trail, which was 320 miles up the state of Indiana. We can dive into that more as we talk about retreats and pilgrimages, which, I would like to do also. But at that time, one of the reasons that I signed up to do that was because I was Googling retreats and searching for something really meaningful, because I don't seem to take time for myself to really dive in to my faith and to have quiet time. I've led a few retreats. and I think when I lead, leading them is a lot more work than attending one, although attending them certainly is some internal work. But every time I have been a part of one, I've always thought that it was something that I wanted to do more. So, we're a couple weeks into 2021 here, but maybe that's a great resolution for me this year is to go on retreat, whether it's a day or longer. And maybe I would love to incorporate that more into my life.
I think there's a marked difference of students and communities who make that time for retreat. It's not quantifiable per se, but there is such a difference. I've seen, I've been part of a number of Catholic schools in my life, and I really believe that. And so I can only encourage people in whatever way, shape, or form that time in prayer, and whether it's, you yourself make a personal retreat, or like I said, with our faculty, it was, a communal retreat. What a gift. So
Yeah, for sure. And again, I love that it was time for the faculty. You're right. Catholic schools do a lot of number of retreats, and my older son, who was a senior last spring, they did an all class senior retreat literally the weekend before they had to close schools down. And even he reflected on how the perfect timing of that. Their entire class came together for a really meaningful weekend that really connected them in a way that you can't connect in other ways, right? There's a real bonding that takes place on retreat that I don't think you can facilitate in other ways. And in many ways, that's what got them through those last 2 months of school where they weren't together, was that they had that time.
I love it. Yeah. A popular title for a retreat is Kairos, and Kairos is God's time. And so when we make a retreat, it's God's time. And that was obviously, I love hearing that story because I can think of the giftedness and the graces that came from that. And it's interesting, Haley, because at St. Francis, where I am, we are trying to plan our coaches retreat. And it's been difficult figuring out the right time because we are not participating in sports right now. None of our sports are in season. So, where's God's time in all of this? And we're trying, as I keep telling my boss, who I have the most love and respect. I mean, I can't even say, we should talk about bosses sometimes, maybe not, but I love and respect him so much. I keep telling him, I'm trying to read the greens, and that's a golfer's term, trying to read the green, feel it out of when's the right time. And we are anxious to offer this retreat because we believe in the power of retreat, and it is God's time. So it will happen, but it's also like, we want to feed people with something and trying to read the green and figure out what is it that our coaches need right now. So if I was to lead a faculty retreat right now, that would be an interesting question. That's above my pay grade, but what are the needs of teachers right now?
Time.
Tend to that.
Well, I'm going to add retreats and I'm going to add coaches to our topics for future topics because, I know coaches aren't coaching right now. Many of them aren't in their sport, but what a privileged time to be a coach right now and to really teach so many of these life lessons that we're all sort of bumbling our way through. Coaches coach, but they also teach.
Agreed.
So we have a lot to talk about that we have already started on, but our topic this week, being justice. And, we're honoring Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. this week. Boy, I remember growing up in Arizona and we were the last state to add that as a holiday. And it was really an embarrassing time to be an Arizonan because we kept voting down adding the official holiday in the state. I don't know if you remember that, Ann. It was the late 80s. And we actually had the Super Bowl taken away from us. They were supposed to play out at the time, what was Sun Devil Stadium. And boy, to think that happened in my lifetime, I don't feel like I'm that old, but, just the social injustice of that, of, an entire state and legislature thinking that he wasn't a person worth honoring, is really pretty extraordinary that it was not that long ago. But just the whole idea of, justice and what is justice. And, you and I have had a lot of conversations leading up to this about what it means and justice not necessarily meaning equality, but fairness, making sure that people are treated fairly and with compassion. We had a really neat guest speaker at the school where I work this week, and the topic that Dr. Wise spoke about was raising color brave children. And I work at a K through 8 school, so we have children more than we have teenagers. But really so much of what we want to teach our kids and students and children does start at a very young age. It's really hard to lay those foundations or change those biases as they get into high school. So our goal is, early childhood educators, is to really instill a strong foundation. And in this topic, raising color brave children, she started off with an activity where she asked each of us, there was about 80 of us virtually online. She asked us to write down 6 names of people that we really trust. So the names of 6 people that we would confide in, that we would maybe share our concerns, that we would open up to. And these 6 people could not be family members. So we could not be related to them. So writing down the names of 6 people that we truly and genuinely trust. And then she asked us to look at those names and put a check next to everyone who is the same gender as us. And then put a check next to everyone who's about our same age. And then put a check next to everyone who is the same race as we are. And as she went through that exercise, for all of us who were listening to her presentation, no matter our background, we all saw very quickly that we trusted, our 6 closest friends that we trusted were all very much like ourselves. For the most part, in my list, they were women, they were, mid to late 40s, and they were white. The one exception was my coach, Tim. I felt good about that. At least I had an older male, but that was beside the point. The point was that we surround ourselves and we trust people and share and talk to people who look like ourselves. And if we're doing that with our children, we're never going to create that diversity of thought that is so important when you're really forming messages and beliefs. And, that was such a great exercise for me to understand the importance of broadening that circle of trust. And I thought it was really interesting. Father Tom in the Mass that we attended today, mentioned this in a different way, in a more mainstream way, maybe in his homily, where he was talking about, who do we follow on Twitter, and how are we receiving that information and those opinions and that social commentary. And, for the most part, we follow people on Twitter who we like and who we agree with and who we want to hear more from, but not necessarily people maybe who are challenging our thoughts, or people we disagree with and, strongly disagree with. We don't want to hear from them, but maybe we should. So in thinking about justice and what it means to live in a just world, which we do not right now, how important that is to really look at who we are with and who we are hearing from.
When I hear that exercise, which is, it's really interesting, and I thank you for sharing that. I hope people have 6 people in their lives that they trust that are not family members. That was one of my initial questions. Even before we assume that they're like us, do we have 6 people?
Right, that's true.
Well, I don't know if that was difficult. I mean, you're a very connected person, Haley. You make time for relationships. That might be the beginning challenge. And then second, yes, we don't want, this is a hot word right now, the echo chamber, where we're only hearing people that look and sound like us. So I think it's interesting that you did put an example, like you do have, your coach. And I do believe in the power of multi-generational relationships. I think they're really important. And they're probably not something we take for granted. It's the senator from Nebraska, Ben Sass. He wrote about this. He wrote about it in the book, and I listened to it on Audible. But he says how important, he stressed for our country that we need spaces and places of where we can cultivate multi-generational relationships. And I've never forgotten that. And I think that's one of the virtues of golf, is that it has allowed me to create, and maybe cultivate those friendships. Like, for example, this week I played golf with this young man. He's 25 years old. I mean, he's 20 years younger than me. He wasn't my student. We're friends. In any other world, I don't really know where that happens if you're not working together or related. So I'm grateful for that. But I think of the power, like we said, of a coach and that is, or a teacher, is that you can be that person in a young person's life where you are the trusted adult. And I've talked about that a lot in the school communities I work in. Like, we strive to be trusted adults for young people, because the only trusted adult in the building, and if it's your teacher, then, I mean, we were challenged to be that trusted adult for maybe somebody who's not your student, where you're not grading them, but you get to know them because of a club, right? Or a sport or a common interest, whatever that might be. So those are some really interesting tips, I think. And I always think back to the 3 questions that Lou Holtz, Coach Holtz said, as a coach, but as a player, you should ask one another. So coach should ask his or her athlete, and an athlete should ask this of his or her coach. Number 1, can I trust you? Number 2, do you care about me? And number 3, are you committed to excellence, or committed, right? And you have to be able to answer all 3 if we're going to get to the same place. And I think that's a great framework for thinking about relationships. And maybe there's justice in those types of relationships. I think of justice as giving a person his or her due, D-U-E. So what is deserved, and that's from Plato. We use that in my ethics class. The tension or the difficulty in that is, well, who decides what is due, right? So an example would be, if you have a disability, you are, and that you should be allowed to park closer to a facility, because that's what's due to you, right? You have some sort of, you're lacking something, therefore to level the playing field will make it more equitable. But who decides is intention, and that's part of living in a good society, and why we need multi-generational relationships, maybe, because they can pass down those insights of what is due for
Yeah.
who. And
Yeah, I love that. And I always, when I think of, when you're thinking about justice and you're talking about the difference between fairness and equality, there's that cartoon that shows a picture of 3 different students. I'll call them students, children, who are all different heights, and they're looking over the fence. And if you give them all the same size step to stand on, the taller one's going to be able to see over, but the shorter one's not. And really fairness or justice, giving them their due there would be, if you give them different size steps, they'll all be able to see over the fence equally. So just being equal and giving everyone that sense of, we obviously want people to feel as though they are valued equally, but I don't think justice is not giving everyone equal things. You're right, it's giving them what they need to be them best selves.
And another way of saying that is giving equals, treating equals equally and unequals unequally. And initially when my students do that, they're like, oh, that's pejorative, that's terrible, that someone's unequal. And it's like, no, that's true. Like, some people are lacking, so we treat them unequally. That is just, that is like, so if you are, you're hungry, you are, unequal in that you do not have food. So we will give you food, right? That is making unequals unequal. Like, we're extending out care, justice, mercy. These all go hand in hand. Justice doesn't work in isolation. But who decides who's unequal? Well, again, that's part of
well, that's another discussion, but I love that we treat equal people equally and unequal people unequally.
The example would be the student who has a learning difference. We give, if you don't have a learning difference, you have 16 minutes on the test. Everybody has 16 minutes on the test. If you have a learning difference, we accommodate and we give you extended time. And if you need it, you use it. If you don't need it, you don't use it. Then we have justice flourishing. Trying to flourish.
Well, and that's all we can do is ask and try.
All we can do, yes. Yeah. So that kind of moves us into maybe our spiritual stew, our readings for the week, Haley. In referencing justice, One of my favorite Psalms, I noticed one of the lines is justice and mercy shall kiss. And I've always thought that's such an intimate image, that the two, the lion will lay down with the lamb, justice and mercy shall meet, they shall kiss. But I looked it up, it's Psalm 85, and Pope Francis invites everyone to pray with the Psalms because he says they're just such a natural way to start prayer. So for listeners who are interested, it's a beautiful psalm, and I'll read from Psalm 85. I will listen for what God the Lord has to say. Surely God will speak of peace to his people and to his faithful. May they not turn to foolishness. Near indeed is his salvation for those who fear him. Glory will dwell in our land. Love and truth will meet. Justice and peace will kiss. Truth will spring from the earth. Justice will look down from heaven. Yes, the Lord will grant his bounty. Our land will yield its produce. Justice will march before him and make a way for his footsteps. And I just think that's so many beautiful virtues and how they work together, and a hope for our people, right? That justice and peace will kiss. I think that's our hope for this week, is that in a transition of power, that it will be,
Yes.
right, a peaceful and a moment where justice can reign.
Yeah, and when I was, thinking about our theme for this week and reading different scriptures, and one thing that really jumped out to me was Zechariah 7:9, where it says, "This is what the Lord Almighty said: Administer true justice, show mercy and compassion to one another." So not much different than, justice and mercy shall kiss, but this was something that really spoke to me, especially as we are moving towards this week. I know that there will be people who take action and say and do things that I will want to judge, their actions and their words. And, that's something that I need to work on, is to not judge, but to take that one step further and to really show mercy and compassion, that allows then for that true justice to come through. And, it's really hard to show mercy and compassion to others who are doing things that you are really appalled by, quite honestly. And I'm hoping that doesn't happen, but to try not to be judgmental or snarky about what is taking place, or what hopefully, won't take place. But mercy and compassion, boy, if we could learn to show that to one another, we really would live in a more just world. And I know this is, something that, as Notre Dame alums, we look to and talk about a lot. One of the things that I had hoped to watch this week is the documentary Hesburgh. Again, I'm sure you've seen it too. I've seen it a couple of times, and it's such a beautiful display of Father Ted Hesburgh's role in civil rights and working for justice, which was a huge thing for him. And there is a very famous picture that everybody at Notre Dame has seen, and most probably non-Notre Dame people have seen it as well, where Father Ted is standing hand in hand with Martin Luther King Jr., and they're singing. And it's really an iconic picture for Domers, for people from Notre Dame. But Anne, you've had an interesting take on that, that I would love for you to share, because I think it's really interesting for those of us who love the photo. What does it really mean?
Yeah. Well, it hung in La Fortune Student Center. It's certainly been used ever since, right? There's been increased awareness on anti-racism, and I've read a couple of alum who said, "Here we go again. We're showing this image." And when I read that, I wasn't shocked. When there's an image or a symbol, it can have great power, but at some point, if it's used too much, people kind of people. I don't know how to say this, Haley. I mean, what's the sentiment that it's?
Well, you become immune to it. I think you just sort of see it as, for better or worse. I think it's a picture that people just sort of put up there and say, yep, I'm all for justice, but are they really walking the walk? And those are actually words that Notre Dame uses. They've really taken a let's walk the walk campaign. And I think they're really striving to do that.
Yeah.
But I know exactly what you're saying, and I can hear the criticisms that people have shared with you. I get it. People show that picture and kind of stop there. And boy, that's not enough. What we need to do is emulate what that picture means, and the spirit of fighting for justice that image represents. Again, it's like going to church on Sundays and then honking your horn at the guy who cuts you off in the parking lot. You really do have to take meaning from that photograph and carry the spirit of the photo with you, and not just hang the photo up or post it on social media.
Yeah. And, nobody markets their materials like our Notre Dame, but, at that point, it falls into that danger zone, and you don't want it to lose its meaning and make it the couch for, oh, no, we got this. We have civil rights. Look at our former leader. It's like, okay, yes, that moment happened, and it's an incredible moment. They lock arms. They're in song. They're lifting their voices in song, which was such a significant part of the civil rights movement. When their spirits were weary, they were still able to raise their voices in song in unison with one another. But it can't stop there, and the work has to go on. And by reading Black Domers and listening to different contributors to Black Domers, I've learned a lot more about that. And that's why you saying name 6 people you trust, a personal challenge for myself is to diversify that group. And by reading Black Domers, I kind of did a personal inventory of that as well. Do I have Black friends from Notre Dame? There was one Black woman in my dorm. Why was that? What's it like today? It's better, it's different, it's more diverse. But who are, part of why I love Notre Dame is that it wasn't a 4-year experience. I continue to cultivate friendships in the university because of our shared love for the university. So are those friendships today more diverse than they were when I was living in Farley Hall? I hope so. And where else can I go with that? And that's also a multi-generational thing as well. One person that came to mind for me is somebody who graduated in 1971. He was the first Black president at Notre Dame. And he is somebody I trust. I absolutely would put him down. And he's really reached out to me, but I've reached back, and I'm grateful for that. So I want to be mindful of,
Yeah, there's also, Notre Dame is doing a Q&A discussion this week with the Dean of the Law School, Marcus Cole, and then
Alan Page.
Alan Page, yes, his name was blanking me. I could see him there. A monogram winner who I had the good fortune of meeting through the Monogram Club. And Marcus Cole wrote a really powerful piece. I don't know if it wasn't a letter, but it was something that was posted on social media. The title of it was "I am George Floyd, but I can breathe." And, yes. The main takeaway from that, once you get through the very powerful personal stories that he shares in it, was to be very intentional about reaching out to expand your circles. And that it's not enough to wait for, that diversity of thought or community to come to you, sure. But we actually have to be very intentional to go out and to bring it in, to welcome it in and to seek it. And that has really stuck with me since that piece came out last summer, and we'll attach a link to that for people who want to read it. But that's, that ties into, who are those 6 people? And I too will be intentional. And I agree. I think the diversity of my friends from Notre Dame since I have graduated is much different than the diversity of my friends from my time there. And, that's certainly a gift too.
Yeah. Well, and I think in friendships, I've talked about this with my faculty because we've done a lot of work on anti-racism as well. The school I'm at now and the one before, certainly it's been an ongoing commitment. And you don't want to just make somebody your friend because for example, I'm white, so I don't want to just make somebody my friend because he or she's a person of color. But it's also like, I want to learn. I want to hear perspectives. And part of friendship is just being interested in the life of another person. And if a friendship's born, what a gift. And if not, you learn along the way. So I don't know what my six people looks like a year from now. That might be interesting to think about, but I certainly know, yes, like you said, reaching out to people, and I think there's nothing more affirming when people ask, what do you think? Um, I was just so grateful when, this past week I blogged about somebody like Justice Amy Coney Barrett, and a lot of people just didn't say anything to me at all when she was nominated. It was not a comfortable time. But for people who just said, that's a big deal because you're a Notre Dame grad, like, that's a big deal. What do you think? And I was just like, thanks, like, please don't assume that you know what I think. And thank you for asking. And then in return, what do you think? And if we don't agree, so be it. But if we do, okay. So I think that's part of justice is seeking to know um, about the other, whether or not it's a shared opinion, but just genuinely, like, wanting to know what is important to another person.
Right. And again, going back and then really listening, right? Not just asking the questions, but really listening to what people have to say. And I think so much of the turmoil, without getting political, that we have seen in our country is people who for years have felt like they haven't been heard. And that they aren't being treated justly. And they
Yeah.
haven't been.
Yeah. What do you think? Correct.
And again, a takeaway for us for the week, I think, is to be mindful of our circle, and it is to be mindful of what's going on in this world. And unfortunately, the injustice is that we will see this, as we move through the week. Hopefully, it's not significant or permanently damaging at all. But to try to move through this week and this time with mercy and compassion for those of us who are trying to struggle and muddle our way through, just doing the best we can to live a just life.
Well, I think that's, as we move towards the melting pot, kind of like the takeaways or kind of our pieces of perspective and nuggets of wisdom. I think, Dr. King was also a reverend, right? He was a Baptist minister. And so many times I have used his very words in my prayer life. So one of the quotes that he loved is from the prophet Amos, and it's rather let justice surge like waters and righteousness like an unfailing stream. What a beautiful image for righteousness and justice. And San Francisco, Yerba Buena Park has a waterfall, and those words are etched in the background from Dr. King. But one of my former colleagues would always, conclude mass with kind of a call and answer, and he'd say, let's, and the students would say, roll, go cats. And let's roll is just a reference to let, justice, like it says here, surge like water, and righteousness like an unfailing stream. So let justice roll is kind of the synopsis piece. So I think I read letters from a Birmingham. I used to teach letters from a Birmingham jail. That was one of the prompts when I applied to Notre Dame, was to respond to something from letters from Birmingham jail. And I actually hadn't read it in high school, but I remember that and thinking, oh, that's probably something I should read. And then having read it years later and having taught it, it's also a wonderful primary source by which, you could read and pray with Dr. King's message there as well.
So that would be a great piece, probably for most of us. I've actually never read it. I'm embarrassed to say. So check back in with me to make sure I've done that. I need to pick that up, or if I have, it's been a long time, and it's certainly not something that's part of anything I've read currently. So that is a good takeaway for me.
And that's part of our tradition here, I would say, is letters, right? St. Paul wrote letters, and so much of scripture is these letters. And so in that way, if you frame it that way, Dr. King's letter from this jail cell is really within, the Christian tradition of, he wasn't certainly the only person that was imprisoned, right? And in terms of the faith. So really living out his faith and living that out in a place like prison. And I think this week I was struck by the words of Sister Helen Prejean. She advocates for people in prison, specifically men and women on death row. And I don't know if people caught it, but for the first time, the United States executed a woman named Lisa Montgomery. It was for a 2004 murder. But the US government, the federal government, hasn't executed a woman since 1953. And she's the only woman on a federal death row who died. Helen Prejean was the Latari Medal winner at my graduation in 1996. I would think a lot of my classmates think of her as the commencement speaker because she's such a dynamic speaker. But her whole life has been spent advocating for men and women on death row, so in prison. And she had a very powerful tweet, and she said, "The death penalty is fundamentally a poor person's issue. Over nearly 40 years of visiting death row facilities across the US, I have never met a single person with money or resources. Capital punishment means those without capital get the punishment." So she challenges us to think about the justice, right, of the death penalty. And she does it by living and really ministering to these people in I think, a profound way.
And I think that's a great sort of launching point for this week, for next week, for next topics. There are many people even in talking about the vaccine. Do we give the vaccine to those who are incarcerated? And and a lot of people say no, but when you really do look at who are in our jails, they are our most vulnerable, and in many ways they are our most vulnerable because of the situations that they have found themselves in many ways, not due to their own actions, but just sort of the nature of where they are and living without capital, as she says. But, thinking justice isn't something that we should think about in January or on Martin Luther King Day. It's really something that needs to be lived every day, every week, every month. I appreciate, again, I had mentioned being embarrassed living in Arizona and not celebrating Martin Luther King Day when I was younger. I would like to think that maybe Arizona was just ahead of their time in realizing that we shouldn't just honor his life and his work for justice one day a year. We should really do that every day of the year. I don't think that's what Arizona was thinking at the time, but I think it's a great lesson for us to remember to really honor his work and not just talk about it or talk about justice one day or 1 week a year. But we will this week, and as we should, we'll have a transition of power, a peaceful transition of power, which is a hallmark of our country. And I look forward to that in many ways, and I look forward to hopefully seeing the best that our country has to offer. We will certainly be praying this week for everyone in the Capitol, in Washington, D.C., in the state capitals, and across the country.
Yeah, Haley, hearing you speak about MLK as a holiday, I used to always say it's not a day. I say to my students, it's not a day off. It's a day on for justice. So I, had wanted to petition, and I would hope millions of Americans feel this way, petition the NFL that, his holiday or MLK holiday would be a national day of service. So we have the holiday and we have the inauguration in the same week. That happens every 4 years. But wouldn't it be awesome if every American went out in their communities and did service? And it shouldn't be, to your point, like one day a year, but I think there's something to be said for that. And I thought the NFL could really lead the charge because this weekend we have great football. We have the playoffs, which people love because it's always exciting games. But, the majority of teams now are done. And so couldn't they lead, in these cities, 30 cities throughout the United States, couldn't they lead their efforts to do acts of service? It wouldn't take the NFL to do that, but it could be one group that could really help promote it. So that's always been a dream of mine. I don't have Roger Goodell's cell phone, or I'm sure he's busy right now, but I think it'd be really awesome. I would love to join, Jimmy Garoppolo and Kyle Shanahan and George Kittle and working locally to help
Yeah,
in need those, who.
I love that.
So if you're listening, Commissioner Goodell, heads up.
We'll tag it. We'll tag him in it.
I love it.
We'll tag him in the tweet. Well, thank you, Anne. I always love our conversations. This is certainly an important one. Again, not just for today and this week, but for us to remember always. We will be back this time next week after a week of prayer and justice.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, Haley.
Thank you. Have a great week.
You too.